Good morning guys, I hope you are well. Welcome to the second part of the diffusion lesson. Now, in the last lesson, if you watched the last lesson, if you haven't, go back and watch it. Oh my god, it's amazing. In this first lesson, we went through what diffusion actually means, and we gave some examples from cells, and then we described the factors that affect the rate of diffusion. The thing that we're going to cover in today's lesson is how to look at surface area to volume ratio and how that affects the rate of diffusion in cells. If you remember from the first video, rate just implies how quickly something happens, so per second. So we're talking about speed. Excuse the handwriting. Explain how multicellular organisms are adapted to allow for sufficient diffusion of molecules. So multicellular organisms again means organisms with more than one cell, and sufficient diffusion, basically the amount of diffusion needed to keep an organism alive, right? That's what defines sufficient. So let's have a look at this. Why do humans need a circulatory system? So if you think about humans and if you think about a single cell, when we think about getting nutrients to any part of the cell, in a single-celled organism, it's much easier. So if I consider this single-celled organism on the left, I can see that if I wanted to get oxygen, say for example over here, then the diffusion distance that a particular molecule of oxygen, for example, has to get through is this distance here. Yeah. However, if I considered a human, now obviously these aren't comparable in terms of scale drawings, but if I considered a cell at that particular point in the human, the diffusion distance becomes incredibly large, and therefore oxygen isn't going to diffuse through your skin. What happens if your cells don't get oxygen? Well, they can't respire, and therefore they will end up dying. One of the things that you need to kind of work out or be able to calculate is surface area to volume ratio. So we're going to take them one at a time, and we're going to practice two together, and then you're going to do one by yourself. In general, if you just considered a cube, the larger the volume of the cube, the smaller the surface area to volume ratio. Now, cells are really tricky in the sense of they've developed ways to get around this, and I'll talk about that in a bit. But first thing we need to do is work out surface area to volume ratio. Well, bit of maths, but how do you calculate surface area and how do you calculate volume? So first of all, we're going to go with this one over here, which is number 1. So what we're going to do is calculate the volume of this cube first. Okay, so when you calculate volume, it's length times width times height, and in this particular cube, what we're going to do is we're going to treat them all like one. We're going to treat them as 1 centimeter. Okay, I've seen this in an exam question, and it's quite a common one that they like to throw in. So when I'm working out the volume, all I have to do is 1 times 1 times 1. Oh, that's horrible. Let's rub that out. Times. So actually the volume of this cube is 1 centimeter cubed. Then the surface area of this cube is going to be something else. Well, what's the surface area going to be? What I have to do is think about the surface area of one side. So the surface area of one side is going to be 1 times 1, which is equal to 1 centimeter squared. So actually what I have to do is times the surface area of one side by 6. So I do 6 times 1 centimeter squared, which is equal to 6 centimeters squared. So the surface area to volume ratio in this particular example is 6 to 1. Now if we do the same thing for the second cube, but we hopefully can see that this is 2 centimeters in terms of its length, its width and its height, the volume is equal to 2 times 2 times 2, which is equal to 8 centimeters cubed. Now the surface area is going to be this side here multiplied by 6. Well, what's the surface area of this side? It's just going to be 2 times 2, which is equal to 4 centimeters squared. However, like I said, I need to multiply that by 6, so I'm going to do 6 times 4 centimeters squared, which is going to give me 24 centimeters squared. So the surface area to volume ratio in this particular example is 24 to 8. Well, hold up, let's cancel that down, let's simplify it, and they both get divided by 8, and so that 24 divided by 8 is 3. 8 divided by 8 is 1. So actually the surface area to volume ratio for this second cube is 3 to 1. Well, which one's bigger? Clearly that one there is bigger. Okay. Next one, what you're going to do for the 3 by 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, you're going to work out the volume. What do you get? And you're going to work out the surface area. What do you get? And then once you've worked out the volume and the surface area, you're going to give me the surface area to volume ratio. Okay? Pause the video, quick as you can, and then off you go. So hopefully you've had a chance to work it out. Now, what you should have got is the volume of the cube is going to be 3 times 3 times 3, which is equal to 27 centimeters cubed. And then the surface area for this cube is going to be 3 times 3, which is the surface area for one side, which is 9, surface area of that side. And then you've got that one side multiplied by 6. So it's going to be 9 times 6, and 9 times 6 for all you clever people with a calculator is 54 centimeters squared. Now the surface area to volume ratio is 54 to 27. Now can that be simplified? Well, very simply it can. Because actually for those people that know their 27 times table, the answer is actually 2 to 1. So we've gone from having a surface area to volume ratio of 6 to 1, which is a very high surface area to volume ratio, to 3 to 1, to 2 to 1. Now clearly, hopefully what you can see is that the bigger the volume gets, the smaller the surface area to volume ratio will be. Okay? Now, why is that useful? Why is that kind of helpful at all in any way, shape or form? Some cells in multicellular organisms are adapted, specialized to increase the amount of diffusion that can take place. For example, microvilli in the small intestine. So if you zoomed in on the small intestine, what you can see is each one of these individual cells have these tiny projections on the surface, and what that does is that increases the surface area that is available for diffusion to take place. If you took the surface area of a small intestine, an average small intestine, and you stretched it out and you laid it out as flat as possible, so it's one cell thick, it would cover the size of an average tennis court. Okay, which is amazing if you think about that. That's all inside your stomach. Not inside your stomach, sorry. That's a bad use of terminology. That's all inside your abdomen, inside your tummy. Alright? And another place that this happens in is hopefully one that you're familiar with, is inside the lungs. So inside the lungs you've got this very strange grape-like structure called alveoli, and they form air sacs, and they have various adaptations. So what we're going to do is we're going to run through them. Okay, so when we consider the lungs, or the effectiveness of an exchange surface, we can increase that effectiveness, how good it is at letting diffusion take place, by having a large surface area. So again, these microprojections on the or kind of not microprojections, this structure of the alveoli increase the surface area. Having a very thin membrane, so membranes being one cell thick, so it's got to get through one cell of the alveoli and one cell of the kind of blood, or across the cell membrane into the blood capillaries. Having an efficient blood supply, so remember, if you go back to the last video, having a constantly moving blood supply, or having a large blood supply, will mean that you maintain a concentration gradient. And being ventilated, so continuously exchanging gases with the environment, will allow an exchange surface to be effective. Now, obviously all of this is really good, but how does this apply to exam questions? So what we're going to run through now is some practice exam questions. What I want you to do again is I want you to pause, and I want you to have a go at answering these exam questions. Think about all the notes that you've taken so far and see how many of these you can get. What we're then going to do, what I'm going to do, is I'm going to talk you through the answers. Now the first one is a 1-mark question, and it's taken, so all of these questions are level 2 or level 3 questions. So The 1 mark question and 6 mark question is a level 2 question. So in other words, it's going to be at the end of a foundation paper, at the beginning of a higher paper, and the 3 mark question is actually a level 3 question, which is going to be in the second half of a higher paper. All right, pause, and then I'll see you in a sec. Bye. So let's go through these questions. Oxygen will diffuse into the cell in the image below. Why? So why does oxygen move into the cell? Well, actually, if I look outside the cell, this region here, what I can see is there is a high concentration of oxygen, and inside the cell there's a low concentration of oxygen. So what we know about diffusion is that the net movement of particles will be from a high concentration to a region of low concentration. So in other words, why will oxygen diffuse into the cell? The cell has a low concentration of oxygen. Concentration of oxygen. Okay. Check it if you got it right. If you got it right, fantastic. Move on to the next one. And so question number 2, explain why bacteria cells can rely on diffusion for gas exchange, but an animal needs a transport system. Well, if you think about what we talked about earlier, first thing you need to start off talking about is the surface area to volume ratio. Animals have a smaller surface area to volume ratio compared to a bacteria. Therefore, the diffusion distance is larger for an animal. And if the diffusion distance is larger, it will mean that there's not sufficient supply of oxygen for the organism to survive. Okay? Again, exactly what we talked about so far in this particular lesson is we need to have the diffusion distance as small as possible, but in animals that doesn't really happen. So we need transport systems in order to accommodate for that. Animals have a smaller surface area to volume ratio. Well, we kind of looked at how we worked that out, and also we got this general idea that the larger the organism, the smaller the surface area to volume ratio. Okay? So, last one then, describe why diffusion is important in animals and plant cells. Okay, so let's tackle that now. So, the last one is approaching the 6 mark question. Now, with this 6 mark question, in terms of the mark scheme, what we're always trying to aim for is a level 3 answer. Okay, so in the level 3 answer for this mark scheme, it says there is a description of a process occurring in either animals or plants that is correctly linked to a substance, and a process occurring in the other type of organisms that is correctly linked to a substance. So basically what we need to do is describe the process of diffusion happening in an animal cell and in a plant cell. So it pretty much tells you in the question. Okay, so describe why diffusion is important in animals and plant cells. Now we need to refer to specific cells, and we'll talk about that when we get there. So the first thing we're going to do is say why it's important. Diffusion is important to take in substances for use in cell processes. So we've laid out the answer, and to remove waste products from the cell. That's why it's important. However, we now need to give examples. So we're going to give an example in an animal cell first. So an example from an animal cell is diffusion of oxygen into the cell and the removal of carbon dioxide out of cell by diffusing into the blood. Where molecules move from a region of high concentration to a region of low concentration. So we're just describing diffusion, just the things that we already know about diffusion, the notes that we wrote down in the last video, through a partially permeable membrane. And then what I've also done, just to kind of make sure I get all the marks, is I've given an example from a plant cell where water absorption by roots, where water molecules move down the concentration gradient. So again, I've hit that key phrase that we had when we come to describe diffusion. Okay, so overall in this particular example there's 1, 2, 3, 4 sentences that I've used, but hopefully what you can see is I've broken it down and I've used an indented bullet point to highlight exactly what it is that you need to hit in your answer. Okay, guys and girls, ladies and gents, I hope you have a lovely day. Look after yourselves, be safe, like and subscribe as always. It really helps. Take care. Goodbye.